You got to have a vision of where it is we're trying to go. You got to be able to build connection with actual human beings. You got to raise money. You got to market it. Then you got to go actually lead it. You got to do all of these different things. That is a skill set that isn't always asked of everyone. And I'm interested just in kind of your top 3 leadership lessons, or maybe even mistakes made that now you reflect on to say, what's to be learned from leading in an organization like that? And today I'm excited to share what I would refer to as my first professional mentor. The Reverend Dr. John F. Ross is the executive director of the St. John's Bible Heritage Program at St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota. The Heritage Program is an international initiative for individuals and institutions to explore the artistic and spiritual beauty of the St. John's Bible, the first handwritten, hand-illuminated, monumental Bible in 500 years. Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everyone, it's Jason and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast. Wherever you are, however you're coming to the podcast today, welcome in. So glad you are here. We're in season 9, which means I think we just checked the other day and there's 280 some episodes or something crazy like that. So if you are new to the podcast, then welcome in. So glad this continues to grow and spread. Glad you have found it. All you got to do is check through 280 episodes. So not a small task, but if you're looking for a particular topic, all you got to do is Google my name, Jason Barger, and any topic you're looking for around leadership, culture, servant leadership, courageous conversations, trust, accountability, whatever those things are you're looking for. And chances are you're going to find something that at least hopefully resonates with you. If you are somebody that's been with us from the very beginning, then so glad this continues to add value to your life and to your work. My commitment every time I go to record one of these is I want this to be a place where you can step back in your own life and work to think about the temperature that you're trying to set, and to then also hopefully have some good oxygen breathed into you so that you can think about that next step along your journey as a human, as a leader, as whatever type of organization or structure you're thinking about this today. So thanks for being here. If you'll do me the quick favor, I keep being reminded to tell you this. If you haven't subscribed, do that. Hit the 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening on. If you'll leave an authentic review in your own words, that helps the algorithms work, helps more people find it. And then also, every time you share the podcast, whether that's on social media, whether that's with your team or your colleagues at work, and you say, hey, here's an episode I think we ought to talk about, and let's listen and give the questions, talk about them together. All of those ways help amplify these messages, help share them with other people. And that's the entire point of what we're doing here. So thanks to everybody that takes a moment to rate, review, share, all those great things. So awesome. And thank you. I am very excited to invite my guest for today into the chat in just a minute. On this podcast in the past, obviously outside of the content and the topical things that we talk about related to developing leaders and people and culture and clarity around mission, vision, values, all of that kind of stuff, you've heard me talk about the impact of strong mentors, voices of support, and people that just frankly believe in you. And I've had my great friend and mentor, Howard Behar, on this podcast a number of times. You may recognize that, the former president of Starbucks. He has been instrumental in my life and just somebody that has done that, but believe in me, support me, all that. You've heard me talk a bunch of people maybe in the past, Doug Kreidler, who's the CEO of the Columbus Foundation, the 10th largest community foundation in the country. Had a very critical time in my professional career, somebody that took interest in me, believed in me, supported me, said, hey, you can do great things. And today I'm excited to share what I would refer to as my first professional mentor. and somebody who helped see things in me and believe in me, and somebody who is a great friend, but also somebody that means a whole lot to me in my life. And that is my good friend, John Ross. So I'm excited to share him with you. Let me say a couple of quick things about him professionally. The Reverend Dr. John F. Ross is the executive director of the St. John's Bible Heritage Program at St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota. The Heritage Program is an international initiative for individuals and institutions to explore the artistic and spiritual beauty of the St. John's Bible, the first handwritten, hand-illuminated monumental Bible in 500 years. Prior to his work at St. John's, he served for 18 years as the senior minister of Wayzata Community Church, a 3,000-member church congregation in Wayzata, Minnesota. John began his 30 years of ordained ministry at First Community Church in Columbus, Ohio, where he was senior associate minister for 12 years. His influential work at Camp Akita, where I worked with him and First Community, and then followed him as the camp director, again, monumental in my life, and somebody that I've always appreciated his voice and his heart. And he's had a tremendous impact on my life, and especially in those early formative years. So welcome to the pod, JR.
Wow. What an intro. Thank you so much. It is so fun to connect with people, after a few years have gone by, but lately, especially connecting with people from 20 years ago or more, just stunning, because we went from being kids running around who thought we knew everything to now being adults who realize we don't know anything. What a joy. So I'm super excited. And boy, those were very kind words, Jason. Thank you.
Well, they're all true, man, and I'm glad to have you on here. And again, for my listeners, you've heard me talk about the power of mentors and people that support and believe in you, and how powerful those words are when somebody says, "I believe in you, I see something in you." And you were certainly somebody in my life that saw something in me before I ever did, and gave me an opportunity, and certainly helped me, I think, discover some of the voice and things that were exciting and passionate, that I was passionate about. So I think about our early years of running a summer camp. For those of you, again, you've heard me mention maybe Camp Akita at different times on this podcast. You've heard me, but running a big summer camp for kids, over 2,000 kids or something would come through in a summer, and here we were as yes, relatively young people or very young people to run an operation like that with a bunch of college students and then kids all over the place. To think about all the number of houses and things we were lucky to build together in the dirt in Mexico for families living in poverty, and just things that have enriched my life and have been so wonderful to be a part of, with so many great people that were associated with that. Those are some of the memories that come into my mind, but I'm interested, for those early years, is anything that kind of jumps out to you?
Yeah. Looking back over the last 30-ish years or so, I do have to confess, and I mean this with all sincerity, some of those early years at First Community and Akita and the early years of Mexico are still the times and the memories that I cherish as much as any across all those years. Those were really, really special times. And I think not only because of what we were doing, but because of who we were in life too. Sometimes growing up is hard, but I was thinking about you, and funny enough, one of the first things that just came to mind was when I pulled you and Amy Cottingham aside into the back hallway steps of the dining hall. I don't know if you remember this conversation or not, but you guys were coming into the staff at Akita, and I had to remind you guys that there was a no dating rule. and I knew full well you guys were already dating, right? It was like a pre-existing condition, but I was like, you got to try to play it down a little bit, because we're trying to keep these hormones in check among all these other, young adults or late adolescent age kids. And what a what a joke that is looking back on it now, because you guys are so beautifully and happily married for many, many years, and your kids growing and going. Oh my gosh, so fun to watch.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, that's funny. I remember exactly that moment, and it is funny to think about it years later. Where you're like, man, wow. Well, things worked out all right.
Yeah, I would say so. And by the way, you guys aren't the only ones who broke that rule. I mean, at that reunion a few weeks ago, the number of marriages that came out of a staff experience at Akita are pretty remarkable. And looked like they're all doing well. But I also remember with great vivid thoughts and images, one of our trips in Mexico when we were down there with 150 kids or more, something like, it was a big group. And I'm pretty sure we were just outside of Tijuana. It wasn't Tecate. And we were one of those classic sort of dust fields for our campsite, with, like 50 tents set up, and it's just a dirt ground. It wasn't even a gravel parking lot. It was just a dirt field that we were in.
Yep. And
it was the last day. And there was a storm predicted coming, like serious, heavy, torrential rains were headed our way. And the houses were already, like, our work was already done. We were mostly just going to be hanging around to just take it easy, packing up and have a meal and maybe a final night in Mexico before heading back across the border. And we had to make a decision because the storm was like rolling in fast. And I just remember how helpful it was for me to be able to turn to other people like yourself, because you were one of the leaders on the trip, and make a good decision in the context of a group. And I remember specifically, like, one thing about it, I would be prone to, and probably still am, a more, dramatic isn't the right word, but a more like over the top reaction to like a situation like that. Like, oh my God, we got to deal with this, But what I remember about you, and others also, but you particularly, just like calm and cool, collected. All right. Let's think about this. Let's weigh the pros and cons. And under pressure, having like a team, but also cooler heads to prevail. We made a good decision. We did end up leaving because we could have gotten stuck there for a couple days in the mud. And it could have been a real mess. But we made a good decision, and the trip ended well, and, everybody was safe, which is what mattered most. But I just remember walking away from that then, and I still think of it pretty often here and now when a real frantic kind of moment arrives that it really, and this was way before Step Back, but frantic, you take that moment to literally step back and say, all right, what do we really need to focus on? What do we really need to get done, rather than just, getting all worked up and urgent.
Yeah.
And that, as I said, I still think about that on a pretty regular basis. Just be cool.
That's I love that memory, and I remember it that way. But I'm glad that you remember me that way. I think there's power in that, and certainly as we talk about on this podcast, the times when certainly there's been a lot swirling in the world lately. There's a lot that happens in organizations. There's a lot that happens in people's personal lives. To step back and say, how thoughtfully do we want to move? And what does it mean to care for people and to bring people together in the midst of whatever decision we make? So, I appreciate you, and you were big shoes to follow, because you were so good at being able to lead all of those things. And, from that point, you went on to lead churches, and you think about like a big organization, and to go to Wyzetta and to have a large, complex organization. And so, for the chat today, where my mind initially went was, you've got unique experience of leading a large, complex volunteer, not everybody's a volunteer, but very primarily volunteer-led organization
Mm-hmm.
that requires the leader and the team to wear many different hats. And oftentimes in organizations, you have specialists in different areas. And in these kind of organizations, oftentimes you got somebody that's wearing the hat that's got to have the mission at hand and keep that focused. You got to have a vision of where it is we're trying to go. You got to be able to build connection with actual human beings. You got to raise money. You got to market it. Then you got to go actually lead it. You got to do all of these different things. That is a skill set that isn't always asked of everyone. And I'm interested just in kind of your top 3-ish leadership lessons, or maybe even mistakes made that now you reflect on to say, what's to be learned or extracted from leading in an organization like that? Many teams and organizations right now are realizing that they need to do both. They need to engage the minds and hearts of their people in person, where everyone in the room can experience the energy of congregating together and find clarity for the road ahead. And they also need to continue to find ways to engage the minds and hearts of their people virtually, with those who are working remotely or at a distance. So, if you are in the process of planning your next team meeting, company all-hands event, conference, or culture summit, and are looking for support with a powerful keynote speech, facilitated team conversations that are the currency for change, or deeper development on leadership mindset and an intentional strategy for the culture you're trying to create, I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon. I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon. And I'm interested just in kind of your top 3-ish leadership lessons, or maybe even mistakes made that now you reflect on to say, what's to be learned or extracted from leading in an organization like that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, gosh, boy, a whole lot more than 3, but I love the rule of 3. So I guess the first thing I would say, because it popped right into my mind right away, and because I've said it so many times in these kind of conversations, is that context is everything. I spent a lot of time with a lot of other ministers from other churches, and the churches could be very similar in terms of size and scope and reach and complexity. But they were very different one from the other. And so you could have conversations about what somebody's doing in one place, and you should have those conversations. Those are super important, like best practice kind of conversations in a similar sector. But at the end of the day, every place is going to be different from the other. So context is everything. Like the makeup of the staff and the people who are sitting in the chairs are all going to be different. The people who are coming week in and week out, in our case, to sit in the pews, are going to be different. Wayzata, Minnesota is very different from Naples, Florida, or California, or Phoenix. And so I spent a lot of time trying to learn from other people. I was only 36 years of age when I got that church in Wayzata, by the way. So I needed to learn from a lot of other people, but I learned the fastest thing was just that, most of it's contextual. You gotta know your own space.
Yeah, which for this audience, again, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, geez, I don't work or I don't operate in a church environment or a nonprofit environment in some way, the reason why I think this is compelling is because I think it's interesting and it crosses paths or crosses across sectors that I hear this all the time in organizations that have multi geographic locations that, their office in Phoenix is different than their office in Minnesota,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever those examples are, or a department, even just different contextual differences culturally across departments in an organization. And so as you're listening to this conversation today, my hope is that the listeners are thinking about, I think they may not have the experience in being a part of a complex organization like that, but they may, I think they're going to connect with that idea. And certainly context is a big part of that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear what your friend Howard from Starbucks would have to say, right? Because they're trying to create the same experience everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
but everywhere they're going, there are 1 billion locations around the globe. Every
That's right.
one of those locations is different in its own kind of way. So it'd be interesting to hear somebody like that speak to that. The second thing, again, and these are probably pretty straightforward and simple, hopefully universal thoughts, is that you, at the end of the day, you have to be yourself also. As soon as you try to be someone that you're not, you're going to start digging yourself a hole that's really hard to climb out of. And that starts with just knowing what your own strengths are. A big believer in the Strengths Finder work, not just for a team of people, but particularly for, a key leader. You got to know your strengths and you got to know your weaknesses, and you got to either build around them, make up for them, compensate in some ways, rather than try to fake your way out. I'd often say there were lots of Sundays, by the way, Jason, where I had to just fake it till I make it, right? But you can't do that week in and week out, day in and day out. You gotta know your own strengths and, really lead with those and trust the people around you to bring those out in you. I don't know if you're a West Wing guy. I'm guessing you are.
I don't have a ton of knowledge, but I know some of it, enough to be dangerous. So yeah.
Oh my gosh, it is so good. I mean, at least the first 4 seasons are really good, but the one that I would point to is a scene where Jed Bartlett, who's the president, right, and his chief of staff, Leo McGarry, they're in their first season as in their offices as president and chief of staff, and they're floundering in their work, and finally comes through, to get the president just be himself, to follow his own strength, to let Bartlett be Bartlett. That's the key phrase there. Takeaway. I've quoted that so many times. And you think about, when you're sort of stuck somewhere, it might be because you're not really living into your own full, true self. And there were lots of stops and starts, and on that same topic would be the other thing that I would mention that was maybe more of a mistake for me. I reached a point in my ministry when I was not only delegating, I was also abdicating. I was letting things go without keeping an eye on them. And I think there's a really important aspect to that. You gotta let people do what they do. You gotta give them a job, give them the resources they need, and then get out of the way. But you also got to stay connected enough to make sure that the organization, as you would say, stays between the ditches, right? You don't want to go off the road, because you've taken your eye off a key part of it. I had a really painful experience of that one time that, giving people the ability and the power and the resources to do their job is one thing, but then just ignoring them is a whole nother thing. And I had a stretch of time when I was just ignoring too much. And there was some real fundamental changes that happened in the program and ministry life of the church that I couldn't sort of regain or recapture. And that wasn't too long before COVID hit. And then there was actually no recovering from that. And that was hard. So, delegating is critical, but you can't just let it go.
Yeah, no, and again, my listeners, you're anchoring what we talk a lot about on this podcast, but you certainly, the reference to the Strengths Finder, done a bunch of different podcasts around understanding strengths and the connection of emotional intelligence around, do I even know mine, and am I self-aware enough to be able to understand how I enter a room and how I naturally think, but then am I also not only showing that kind of self-awareness and personal competency side of it, but are we able to recognize the social competency side of emotional intelligence? And do I understand the strengths in you? And do I understand how you might contextually be coming into the room? And am I curious about that so that we can make better decisions together? And then the going on without, what are the common language I use around here is, what are we not talking about that we ought to be talking about? Or I've done podcasts around what is mentionable becomes more manageable. And so if we aren't talking about it, or in those words, if the worst side of it is just kind of ignoring it, then we can't expect it to get better. And so the courage that is required to not only the diligence and the focus to stay on it, as you were just referencing, and just keep your eye on it, but then the courage to say, hey, I'm not sure this is going the direction we want. And let's have a conversation about it, and kind of let's make it mentionable so that it can become more manageable. We say, well, what are we going to do about it? Did any of that resonate?
Yeah. In fact, I remember, I can't recall the year that you were with us at Wayzata, but you came twice, at least, to Wayzata. And I think it was on your last visit with Remember. And you were doing it. This was in the chapel. Like, I remember visually, physically where it happened. You said conversation is the currency of change. And our staff was able to take that and live with that for months and tease out the stuff that we weren't talking about that we needed to be talking about. That was super helpful, but it comes from a strong place of trust. And as I was saying, if you just delegate stuff and don't stay engaged, if you abdicate, you're going to lose that connection. And so the conversations are even harder to have.
No doubt. No doubt. Another thing that I think about when in our kind of history together is, again, going way back to camp life, but there was a practice that we started doing together, way back when, that before every camp session, which you'd have multiple, up to, I'm trying to think of what the most we did in a 13, 14 sessions or whatever it was in a summer that we would gather the same staff. Again, you're doing it for the 12th time or whatever it is that summer. And before the campers would arrive, we would sit down and we would go through the 5 goals of camp. And, I'll talk in just a second about, and again, listeners, you will make connection to this from a culture shaping perspective. What is some of the techniques and the tenets that are happening there? But, we used to pause and say, all right, hold on. And it was not like you would sit down or I would sit down and we would just spit them out to the group. There would be a conversation that was the currency for change around what do we think. Now we've done this 12 times this summer, but what do we think these goals mean now? Talk just freelance for a minute about those goals and what you, from your perspective, what you thought was happening and what, kind of how powerful that was. And I'm guessing that same kind of thing carried on in other organizations that you were a part of. But speak to that.
Well, if any of the ex-staffers are listening, I'm going to invite them to say them along with me, because I bet you they can. But for your other audience listeners, we had 5 goals that drove everything we did for many, many summers. And I think still to today, the things that were happening at a place called Camp Akita, those goals, 5 of them were safety, fun, message, affirmation, and community. Not necessarily in that order, except for number 1, safety, right? People are surprised to hear that at a church camp, fun was the second goal that we had. And there were lots of reasons for that. The message was at the heart of it, right? We had a message that we wanted to share that had to do with grace and embracing people for who they are as created by God in God's image. And then we had affirmation as a end in and of itself, and community more as a result of all those other things combining, and the value that I know that you and your listeners hold in value the idea of community. So safety, fun, message, affirmation, and community. Yes, we did those every week for years and years and years. I think for a couple of reasons. First of all, was for just pure focus, right? Like we said earlier in the podcast, we were kids in charge of kids. and we had the most precious thing in the world to these parents in our charge for 4, 5, 6, 7 days in a row in a place that is just by its nature a little dangerous. So you had to have a laser focus first and foremost on safety. I mean, if God forbid anything tragic had happened along the way over any of those years, the whole enterprise could have been lost, and what a loss that would have been and would still be. I think also clarity was an important part of it. Like, there's 1,000 ways to run a summer camp, and they're all great, but this was how we were going to do it. And that clarity helped everybody, to sort of be on board with it, and to be able to really truly embrace it. My wife often says, "Clear is kind."
Shout out to Brene Brown. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's a kindness to the people you're working with in being that clear. And that gives them a chance to own it also. And that was one of the really important things. As you know, we ran those college kids hard. They didn't get much, if any, break during the whole time that the kids were there. And so if they weren't bought in on it, if they didn't feel ownership of it themselves, that'd be a hard thing to do, especially with the kind of sincerity that we saw those college kids doing that work with. And the last thing would be that there was a really important measure of accountability. You may recall, we didn't only do it about 20 minutes before the buses arrived with all those kids. As soon as those buses drove out in a cloud of dust, we walked straight into the lodge without taking a breath, and we sat down and we did our own self-evaluation. We called it celebrations, but it was also, okay, how'd we do on these 5 goals? And we went through them one at a time and kind of graded ourselves. So that accountability was a really important part of it, because pretty quickly into the summer, those staff would know, gosh, I'm going to be held accountable for these things, and I need to be aware of them. I still think about those a lot.
Yeah, no, I think it was certainly effective back in the day. And again, I think about it in the context of running any group of people or any organization in the world today. If we've never lived in the more busy, cluttered, distracted times in the history of the world, then focus is pretty big. And to pause for a second before we do something, or we start a new project, or we go into that meeting, or whatever the example is, and to focus and to have clarity on not just what we're going to do, but why we're doing it and how we're connected to doing it. And then this, again, people on this will know that as we talk culture shaping, that language helps drive behavior. And so if we can't describe what it is that we want, then we can't be surprised when it doesn't exist. And so there was this great language piece of this, and this precision to the language that wasn't perfect, but it was a participatory experience that allowed people to connect themselves to the language. And what does the language, what kind of behavior are we hoping it drives? And then the anchoring of that, which is what you're referring to, is the kind of post, the debrief, if you will, at the end of this is, how did we do? And let's calibrate the thermostat to say, where did we really set the temperature for these goals? And where is it that maybe we would adjust that temperature next time? What individually and collectively, what would we do differently? And so, people that are listening to this and thinking about their team, whatever that may be, their organization, whatever that may be across industry or sectors, core values or guiding principles or goals, these are not just meant to be posters on the wall. They're meant to be a tool that helps drive the behavior we want. And for us all to participate and own that collective experience. And that was playing out right in front of us. And that practice certainly was effective, but I think I see it in organizations all the time, the ones that do it well and ones that maybe are still learning how to do that well.
When you just said it's not supposed to be a poster on a wall, it occurs to me, we never wrote those down anywhere. Yeah. Maybe in the staff handbook that they got at the beginning of the summer and, immediately, collected dust somewhere. We never wrote those down, but less than a month ago, you and I were at Akita with 100 plus past staff members, 90% of whom were there, as part of this same style of ministry. And every one of them could call them up.
Yep.
They all had total recall on those. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. What is honored will be cultivated. And that honoring of that each time cultivates a kind of the way we begin to think about the work that we do. And if culture is shaped moment by moment, every single day by the way we think, act, and interact, then the reminding of, wait, how do we want to be thinking about this thing we're about to do?
Yeah.
And then how do we tie that to action? And what would that look like for our own individual interactions? All of a sudden you have a living, breathing thing that's not perfect. And certainly mistakes happen and things, and you get off track, but then you've got something to come back to and say, how do we calibrate the thermostat differently next time? And I just think it was powerful.
Yeah. We're coming up on a year since arguably my most significant mentor, Dick Flynn, passed away. So it's worth taking a pause and nodding to his influence, not just on the two of us, but on, thousands of lives that went through that place. Because Dick was the one that really brought that kind of clarity and focus and accountability to that particular ministry. And he's very much missed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did a whole podcast coming out of his memorial service and the service of memory, and really thinking about him and the influence that he had, and the kind of impact that he had on folks, and so if you haven't listened to that, I'd encourage you to give it a thought. It's it's in alignment with what we're talking about here, is that mentors along the way give us pieces and things to think about and steer us in a particular direction that hopefully we just try to do the best with. And that was
the But Now.
That's right.
Podcast, as I recall.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. But now. Yeah. So last question. I know we're almost at our time, but I thought, you and I could chat about this stuff forever, but listeners, you might get sick of us. So let's cut it off before they get sick of us. JR. What I'd say, those again, listening in the last couple of weeks, I've done a number of podcasts as it relates to the global flourishing study that was just released, Gallup and a number of other organizations that were part of this effort to study over 200,000 people on all 6 continents, 22 countries around the world. And really with the search of, what does somebody who's flourishing in their life, I mean, everything's perfect, but somebody that's experiencing what they defined as flourishing, what are some of the characteristics that are surrounding people like that? And the opposite is people that are languishing, maybe stuck on autopilot, maybe just struggling in their life and direction and all that. So what is it that helps us flourish? And, they came up with in this research that there were about 6 dimensions that rose to the surface, which, don't really surprise you when you first hear them. But I think there's power in just kind of remembering some of these things. But 6 dimensions, like these people that were flourishing, that they had, a connection to kind of meaning and purpose and mental and physical health, that there was intentionality around that, character and virtue, happiness and life satisfaction, and kind of an understanding of what brings them joy and where is that in their life, financial and material stability, not it's just stability around that. And then maybe the most significant that this panel then talked about, as I was a part of an event where they released this information, was close social relationships. And I think back to not only a time at camp and all these other things that we've been involved with where those things come to life, but I also think about the world that we're leading in right now, that we're living in, that we're a part of right now. And I'm just wondering, at this kind of phase in life, are there any of those 6 dimensions and this kind of idea of flourishing that seem to resonate with you most? I mean, of course, they're all important, but are there any that kind of jump out to you at this phase of your life?
Yeah, and I'm glad I didn't have a bunch of time to overanalyze it, because you're right, they're all good, but like in a first gut reaction to that list, as you just rattled them off, and it might just be kind of where I am at in life, and I think that's the point of your question. But for me, character and virtue is so critically important, and not only inwardly, as I look at myself, like character and virtue, like at 58 years of age, I'm entering that third of my life. I have maybe one more go at really making an impact somewhere, somehow. And if I'm going to be remembered somehow, I would like it to have to do with my character and my virtue, rather than some of the other things on the list, again, that are all important. But character and virtue internally, and with kids that are all in their 20s or one who just turned 30, I think I still have a shot at shaping them and helping them continue to grow into the kind of adults that we would love to have our kids become. So for me, that one immediately off the page. And it made me think also immediately of David Brooks and the book, can't recall, the two mountain. Oh gosh, I'm gonna butcher it, so I'm not even gonna try. But he had these virtues, the resume virtues and the eulogy virtues, like what goes on your resume versus what's said about you after you're dead and gone. Those eulogy virtues and character stuff is like in my head, like all the time right now. But I think also because I see such a glaring absence of character in some public corners of our world right now too. I just can't get my brain around it. I have no idea how we've landed where we've landed. I'm not just talking politics. I see it in many sectors where the total lack of character and the total absence of virtue have us headed down pretty dangerous paths. I think, I don't want to end on a downer note, but I see the need within myself, and I see the need around me also in that particular one on the list.
No, I appreciate that. And yeah, when I look at that, and I hear the as I was listening to this panel and listening to the way they were describing it, again, nothing was kind of aha, like, oh my gosh, we've never heard this or never thought of it this way. But I think the connection of those is what resonated with me, and certainly this tie to close social relationships and really getting back to the connections of why, how do you have an influence on people and in a positive way, without having a relationship and a connection. And certainly I come to it also with putting on the lens or the hat of what does it mean for organizations. And again, anybody who listened to the podcast, I did it with Tamara Miles and Wes Adams about their research around meaningful work and where, what are those characteristics? There's a lot of commonalities in here, but this connection to, do I have a meaning and purpose to it? And am I connected to people that we're trying to come together to do something interesting? And in that, the kind of search for that journey is as important as anything. And people in their minds often go to, financial and material stability is first and foremost what people want in a workplace environment. And really the statistics say that's not really true, that again, financial and material stability But really what they, everybody wants that, and everybody wants to certainly be fairly compensated and have the ability to do things they want to do in their life. But really where they say they want more of is meaning and purpose and social, relationships, connections to humans. And I agree with you that around the character and virtue of the organizations that seem to be doing the best at navigating their way through challenges in the world, there is a connection to how we do what we do. And back to those goals, back to those values, back to those, that we want to be countercultural of not just what we do, but how we do it. And so those are some of the things. Again, for anybody listening out there, if you want to hear more about that global flourishing, you can listen to the other podcasts. But I just think it's interesting of the world that we're in right now, and I would say the opportunity and the need for people to set a temperature that brings out the best in other people.
Yeah. I think that's all right on. And I'm looking forward to, by the way, digging into that material and listening to your past couple of podcasts. And maybe I'll just offer this as a final thought. What I'm going to be listening for in that work is the role of communication in it, and the fact that we are right now in the eye of the storm of only the second major shift in how humans communicate across the whole history of humanity. We went from oral communication to the printing press just over 500 years ago, which went to print. And now in the last, let's be generous and say 40, 50 years, we've gone to electronic. And holy buckets, I don't think we have any idea what the smartphone is doing and has done to our communication, both for good and for bad, and how all of these things are impacted by this little thing we've only had in our pocket since 2007.
Yep, that's right.
Unreal.
Yeah, the rapid amount of change and certainly and this podcast is an example of that, of like that this, here somebody's out there listening to this is where they're getting messaging and or some thoughts, and hopefully this is an example or hopefully a positive contribution that's being made to that very noisy world. But you're right, is a proliferation of the way that we communicate, and does the message get lost in translation, or does any of that get challenged in terms of the kind of stuff you're talking about? So I think it's a great question. And I think it's, I guess my final thought will bring us back to where you look is where you go. And what we end up giving our time and our focus and our attention to, our hearts to, is where our bodies will follow. And so bringing it back to that focus and clarity that you talked about earlier is, well, what do I give mine to? And what do you give yours to? And what do we as a team or as an organization, however you're listening to this today, where we look, our bodies will follow. So what is it that we're looking for? And what is it that we choose to honor? So I just want to say, buddy, thanks for hopping on. Always great to chat with you. And so much great history and appreciation for you. And so thanks for at least sharing a few thoughts from your vantage point.
Well, it's great being with you, Jason. I couldn't be more proud of who you are, what you're doing, and as I say, most importantly, how you're doing it. Keep it up, brother.
Thanks, buddy. I appreciate that very much. So thank you to JR for joining me today. If you want to know more about JR and the things he's into, check out the show notes. I'm going to put some more information if you want to check out more of what he's up to and connecting to. That'll be right in the show notes, so make sure you see that. I'll just remind us all, cheers to everybody on the road ahead, the future of leadership, the future of culture, the future of whatever team organization that you're a part of is you're a part of it, I'm a part of it, we create that. And so we've got to be the thermostats. We have an opportunity to be a thermostat for the temperature that we want to set. And so what a joy and what a great thing it is that we can take ownership for what is it, the team or the organization that we want to have. And that you are an important part of that, whatever it is that you're creating and whatever you're a part of. So the best cultures, the best teams, the best organizations, the best relationships, the best whatever don't just magically happen. They're intentionally led and shared with people. So thanks to everybody for listening. Again, if you haven't subscribed, please do that. Rate, 5 stars, review, share all the great stuff. And lastly, I'll remind you to step back, remember, be a thermostat, and breathe good oxygen. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.